Touchdown, Chargers!
What's up, guys? Welcome into a brand new episode of Chargers Weekly. As always, joined by the voice of the Chargers, Matt Money Smith. We are 1 month away from the 2025 NFL Draft. And, buddy, I was just talking to you about your podcast last week with Jaleel. I think Tyler Conklin was signed the second you guys stopped down. Seems to be a theme with our podcast this month.
Yeah, look, and it's a big one. It was really the one position that was sort of just blinking. Need. You know, a pass-catching tight end. Will Dissly was great last year. I know a lot of people, look at that through a couple different lenses. For me, that shows you what Greg Roman can do with the tight end position, how good this offense is for a pass-catching tight end, that you can make Will Dissly, that viable of a pass-catching tight end ever after having not been that for pretty much the entirety of his career. So now imagine placing someone that is more geared toward the pass-catching side of things, the receiving side of things, as opposed to the blocking side of things when it comes to their strengths. And I know Conklin's not Evan Ingram. That was who we were talking about 2 weeks ago when he was out for a visit, ultimately chose the Broncos over the Chargers. But Tyler Conklin's a good tight end, man. He, in terms of what is asked of him, I went through every single one of his targets, every single one of his catches, every single one of his explosives, his first down catches, his touchdowns, basically half of his routes that he ran. Look, he is a receiving tight end. That is what he is. He has got incredible hands. He made a ton of contested catches. I think I posted one, the touchdown he had against the Pats, where he took an absolute lick, got sandwiched by two different defensive backs as Aaron Rodgers fit that throw into a very tight window, held on for the score. And there's a whole lot of those when you go through his tape from just last year. And you think about the options and all of the belly aching out in New York over who was getting targets and who wasn't. You still have Garrett Wilson out there. You had Devontae Adams show up. You have, obviously Alan Lazard, who's always been a favorite target of Aaron Rodgers. And here's a tight end that's rolling out with 50-plus catches, with 5 touchdowns, with 500 receiving yards. And those are good numbers, man. Those are good numbers on a team with Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard when Aaron Rodgers is throwing the football. So I thought it was a great signing, a value signing. And much like we've seen in years past, Chris, Jared Cook, Gerald Everett, Tyler Conklin is just another tight end that we expect to produce and do great things because Justin Herbert's his quarterback.
Yeah, just the inconsistent quarterback play in New York, too, over the last 4 years to put up those numbers with a bunch of different guys. And, Muddy, that was probably the last piece in terms of a position that they needed to fill before the draft. And now I think at 22 overall, the possibilities are limitless. You have Najee Harris on a 1-year deal. You have Conklin on a 1-year deal. Mekhi Becton on a 2-year deal. You added some veteran depth at defensive tackle in a draft that's loaded at defensive tackle. So really, I think all moves now at number 22 overall are on the table. We could go Ted McMillan if he drops. We can go Golden. You can go Hampton. You could go Loveland. You can go with a talented offensive center or defensive tackle, an edge. Really, it would be silly to even speculate who would even be there at number 22 overall in a draft that has so much depth, and really there's really no consensus as to what it's going to look like from 1 to 22.
Yeah, the one thing, and we talked about this, how it benefited them last year, or not last year, the year before. Now, granted, they ended up with Q, and all of the players that we were speculating were, Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison and Dalton Kincaid and that line, and we were like, man, I think maybe Bijan falls to him. That's what we were getting into because of all the quarterbacks that we knew that were going to be drafted. Last year, we didn't quite get into it as much because they had a top 5 pick and assumed that they were going to take Joe Alt or Malik Neighbors. That's likely what it came down to. This year, I think what you do, the exercise, and maybe we do it down the road a little bit as free agency continues to shake out. I don't think the signing of Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston precludes the Giants from taking a quarterback there if they want. And plus, I don't suspect that Shedeur Sanders is going to last outside of the top 10. So I think, the quarterback numbers are still 2. And who knows, maybe 3. You look at some of the mock drafts that are out there, and they're starting to drop Jackson Dart into that first round, potentially to the Steelers because of how their quarterback situation has managed to shake out. So I bring all that up because, okay, so there's 3. And then you look at really the only other two positions of need, or the other two positions that are settled, that the Chargers, I could not see them drafting a player in the first round. I cannot see them drafting an offensive tackle, and I cannot see them drafting an off-ball linebacker. When you have two young players like Henley and Colson, when you have Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater and Justin Herbert, there are the three positions that we add to the mix of two, possibly three. So now we're from 22. Let's say it's three, because I do think that another quarterback's going to get in there. So now you're from 22 to 19. When I look at the tackles, I'm thinking probably 4 to 5. I think 4 to 5 are going to go. So now you're moving up 8 spots. When you take those players, that there is not an off-ball linebacker that I suspect is going to make his way into that top 20. It's going to be edge, interior lineman. So now we're talking about 8 positions, and you've gone from 22 to 14. So now you can kind of look at those positions of need and figure out which of these 14 players, or how many of these, let's say 20 players, do we suspect will be sitting there at 22? And I think with the signing of Conklin, like you said, and with the signing of Andre James and bringing back Bradley Bozeman, the signing of Mekhi Becton, don't have to freak out. You don't have to worry that Gray Zabel might not be there. If it's Tyler Booker, that he might not be there. If it's one of the receivers, with bringing in Mike, I still think wide receiver is a big need, but with bringing in Mike, at least you have an X, and you hope he stays healthy. So you don't have to freak out if T-Mac is not there. With Tyler Conklin, okay, no worries. We have time to develop a tight end. If Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren are gone, you can get that second, third round tight end and develop them and give it a year and sprinkle them in. And that's what I think people have to remember is the depth allows you to maybe to draft somebody at a position where you can afford to have some patience, and they don't need to be dropped in like, oh my God, we have this need and they need to play immediately and they need to play at a high level. That's what signing these players and the way that Joe Hortiz's approach free agency has done when it comes to how they can approach the draft.
Yeah, and free agency is not over yet. You go back to last year, how late in the game J.K. Dobbins was signed, Poona Ford, the one that everybody was upset about leaving, he was signed later in free agency. So I go back to just a couple of weeks ago and all the angst over the first couple of days of free agency. Had Joe Hortiz signed Mekhi Becton on day one, it would have been fine.
Totally fine.
Right? But what he did was he got a discount. He got a deal. If all these guys would have been signed the first couple of days of free agency, I think that in large part the consensus would have been, hey, the Chargers did pretty well in free agency. They still have to pay Rashawn Slater. I know it was his birthday. I think you put up on Instagram a little gift, maybe a contract. But those are the big signings, money. Like Rashawn Slater, you got to get him done. I'm very confident that'll get done in ample time. But let's kind of home in on the wide receiver position, because I'm with you. I think that maybe there is another veteran that you could add later in free agency, but the fact that Golden and McMillan, if one of those guys is in that conversation at 22, yeah, exactly, or Loveland at 22 as well, like there are really intriguing options for this team and for Justin Herbert to maybe get that X receiver. There's a lot of conversation about McMillan's 40 time. And maybe that plays into the Chargers' advantage at number 22 overall, if for some reason he were to fall to them.
Yeah, I'd be crazy surprised if he fell. I'm a bit biased, having lived, up the road and paying attention to the Trinity League of where he went to high school. I know I've talked about it before here and what he was able to do with Servite and make them a viable threat against Mater Dei and Bosco. They didn't beat him, but they traded punches with him, and a lot of that was T-Mac and Fafita, and he was the straw that stirred that drink. So you've got that. Arizona was a nothing program, and he was their best player and helped that team to upsets across the board in the Pac-12, to a bowl win, and never felt the need to take a bunch of money and leave, was fine staying there even after his coach left. And so I think that speaks to the character, one. And I think that's some of the stuff that's been whispered is, oh, does this guy really love football? Is he a little immature? Like, I don't get where that's coming from. Now, I don't have the insight maybe with some coaches, or I don't know what he was doing at Arizona. But to me, from the outside looking in, I don't see any of that. I see a competitor that lifted mediocre to poor programs to heights that they had not experienced in a number of years. And then I look at the size, legitimate 6'5", legitimate 215 pounds. I look at the athleticism. I know people, you mentioned the 40. I thought he ran a lot faster than he was gonna. The 4.55 to me is fantastic. People were talking about him maybe clocking a 4.65, 4.7. So 4.55 for a guy that's that fast, great. And then you put in the background, that he was a Division I scholarship volleyball player, and that ability to high point and leap and be comfortable leaping and timing and using your hands actively in those contested catch situations, like he's a perfect fit. I've just spent 2 minutes talking about a guy. There is no chance he's going to be there at 22, Chris. There's just if he is, holy cow, but I cannot envision him making it that far.
Buddy, another position in this draft, running back, obviously stacked. And you look at the Najee Harris signing, obviously 1-year deal, his durability in Pittsburgh on display for 4 years. So I know that's what attracted Jim Harbaugh and Joe Hortiz to getting Najee in LA. But I feel like that room is still incomplete. And whether they get a running back in the first, second, third, fourth round, that's another position of depth in this draft that I have no doubt the Chargers will probably try to get.
Yeah, and I think, you said it there, Chris. It's like I could see him drafting a running back in the first. I could see him drafting a running back in the second, in the third, waiting until the fourth because of the depth at the position. There's a number of different directions that they can go. I think you look at who's available in the first round, and I think there's certainly 2 players in Ashton Genty and Amari Hampton, and I think potentially a third. I really think Travion Henderson is going to find a way to creep into that third round, and it's sort of one of the things that makes the exercise of something I love, the PFF mock draft simulator, kind of so tough to figure out because they still have Colston Loveland rated way too low, and he's always available when I'm running through the different options for the Chargers. And they still have these running backs rated way too low. I think Quinshon Judkins could sneak into the back end of that first round because you're talking about teams that are ready to win. And that's something that we've talked about when it comes to running backs. If you've got depth, if you're a team that was competing for a Super Bowl last year, like the Chiefs, like the Eagles, who filled their running back need with Saquon Barkley, and he gave them 2,000 yards and an MVP-level performance. If you're the Commanders, the Lions, obviously they already did it with Jahmyr Gibbs with the 12th overall pick. Like those, and I say all of that because of the idea that you could maybe still get one of your guys at 55 might not be the case. The league has shifted a little bit, and so. We were talking about it a little bit earlier. You brought up Amari and Hampton, and I think that's why if he's there at 22, I would suspect the Chargers will take a long look at it. And even though it's not necessarily, I'm using the air quotes for people that are just listening, a premium position, it's a position that's a premium for the Chargers because of how they want to play. They want to be a physical team. They want to be the bully, and the best way to be the bully is to have Najee Harris and Amari and Hampton as a 1-2 punch. Now that you've put Mekhi Becton next to Joe Alt, now that you've brought in, Andre James to create some depth at center, and you're going to be able to find centers and guards later in the round. Tackles you have to find in the first round. Centers and guards, yeah, it's great to get the number 1 guy like they did with Zion at 17. Still kind of waiting for that to shake itself out. But, Gray Zabel, Tyler Booker, some of those, and they're talking about some tackles kicking into guard, but you can find interior offensive linemen a little later. So to me, it kind of goes back to your original point, Chris, where this could be anything. It could be anything at 22, and you're going to be able to make sense of it. Now, if they wait, maybe Quinshon Judkins is there at 55. Maybe it's Cam Skattebo at 55. Maybe it's Dylan Sampson or, Giddens. The list is just extensive for which back that could be, depending on which round you want to pick them in. But to your point, and for this exercise, yeah, Amari and Hampton at 22 would make. I don't think there's any issue with that whatsoever from Charger fans and from people that are breaking down and giving grades for how you did.
I go back to something that DJ said when the Lions drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, and everybody kind of had their eyebrows raised and was It's like, wow, a running back that early? Like, what are the Lions doing? Well, the Lions already took care of everything else. They took care of their offensive line, their defensive line. I'm not sure that the Chargers are quite in the position that the Lions were in when they did draft Jahmyr Gibbs, but we're seeing some of that stuff start to play out here in the first year and a half of Harbaugh and Hortiz. And there's these philosophies like, would you draft a running back in the first round? Some people say no way. Some people say, hey, if it's a game changer, if it's a game changer and you have this timeline of Jim Harbaugh over the next 4 years and you get a guy who you'll know will be a Charger for 5 years, I mean, I think it's absolutely a slam dunk to draft a running back if you believe that that guy is going to be the biggest difference maker on your team and can help you win a Super Bowl. But I do think that all of these one-year deals in free agency have really set the Chargers up to kind of do anything on the board. But if Amari Hampton is there, I don't know if he will be there. I really do think he's going to go in the top 15 to 20, just because he's that dynamic of a player. He doesn't have to leave the field. I could see the Denver Broncos maybe getting him and adding him as a kind of a final piece to their offense. But Colston Loveland's another one. You talk about PFF. They have him super, super high. DJ has him as a top 6 prospect. And we're seeing conversations about him being available at 22. Would you trade up for a tight end? Would you trade up for a Tyler Warren or a Colston Loveland if you needed to?
I would trade up for Tyler Warren. I think if he's sliding, and for me, it's so hard to run through that hypothetical because I just can't envision it. I think Tyler Warren is what every single team in the league needs at tight end. He's that good. He's a full service blocking, catching, bully, throwing. Saw that in the USC game, elite level player. So, to me, that's look, if it happens, yeah, I'm not crazy about trading up in the first round just because of the cost. It's so expensive to move up in the first round, which is why the hope is that some of these teams with extra picks that are more in rebuild mode and view kind of that group of defensive tackles, or if an offensive tackle is sliding, or if they do have like a significant separation between these 3 wide receivers, right? You have T-Mac, let me get this squared away. You have T-Mac, Golden, and Egbuka, right? And then people feel like maybe there's there's Burden. Is he like just right below there? And then after that, you kind of have your Jaden Higgins, Trey Harris, Ayano Mayor. Like those are the opportunities that maybe if you're the Chargers and you're at 22 and you're like, yeah, we'll kick back and find our way to 32 and pick up 48 in the like that sort of thing. Those teams that have those 2-2s. That's something that could be interesting. I feel like there's going to be an elite player available at 22, whether that's that interior. As I kind of went through the exercise, I put in order of need. So we talked about the positions that are already settled: tackle, linebacker, quarterback. And then in order of need, I do think they need a pass rushing interior defensive lineman desperately.
Yeah.
Now I love T.R. Tart. That I don't feel like I have to qualify that, but I want to point out, I think he can get after it. He can push the pocket, collapse a pocket, and help those edges eat. But I do think with the depth at this position and the level of player that could be available, we've talked about Kenneth Grant already and how much Jim Harbaugh loves him and why, if he's there, I'd be so surprised if they took a pass on him. He's called him an alien, a freak, a monster, all of those things. I feel like I'm one of the only guys that has Walter Nolan as high as I do. I watch him play and I look at that body and I just envision what Mike Elston and Jesse Minter could do with him. And I get excited. I know a lot of people like Derek Harmon. And then the funny thing is you kind of go through that. Then you look at pick 55 and you're like, God, Omar Norman Lott wasn't asked to do a lot at Tennessee, but you watch him and man, that dude has got violence in his hands and body and the ability to get upfield. And you're like, okay, what's the difference between these two players, and does it make more? And then what's the difference between Egbuka or Golden or T-Mac and that next level wide receiver that you're talking about? And like that's the exercise that they're going to go to. It's this and this, or is it this and this, or does it make more sense to trade out and get one of those high second round picks and hope that, hey, here's Quinshon Judkins instead of Omarion Hampton, and we picked up an extra 2. So now we have 3 2s, ours and 2 others, in order to get after Giddens, Judkins, and one of the, Tyleik Williams as your interior defense, although he's more of a run stuffer, big body guy as opposed to a pass rush. But you know what I'm saying? Like that's what all of these signings, and I mean, you talked about it, Chris, the 1-year deals that they've been making, like that's where you're going to find value in free agency. Taking a huge swing on Milton Williams, because they had all this money to spend. That's just not, they had too many holes to fill, and to be able to create this situation where they can draft whoever they want with whatever pick they want based on how their board looks, regardless of position. That's always what they were going to do. And that's kind of the way they approach it. And now we feel good about it. Like, am I completely and totally settled that Mike Williams is going to be healthy for 17 games and be your X receiver? No, you can't be, because of his history. But feel pretty good about it today. I feel like, yeah, you know what? You roll out there with Ladd in the slot, Mike is your X, and a couple different options at Z, including Q. Yeah, I feel pretty good about that. I feel pretty good about Will Dissly and Tyler Conklin. I feel pretty good about whoever wins the center job, along with Becton, Zion, Slater, and all. Feel good about that. Feel good about Najee Harris, and then we get to defensive line, and that's why I bring up interior defensive line. It's like, okay, they got Tier Tart, and they got, Deshaun Hand and Naquan Jones, and it's like, yeah, that's something they're going to need to figure out.
Yeah, but the breadcrumbs tell you that they will get those defensive tackles at the draft. Every person we talked to last month in Indianapolis, defensive tackle, the deepest defensive tackle draft we've ever seen.
Yeah.
Running back, another deep position. I'm with you. I don't think that there's going to be a lot of trade-ups in this draft. I just think that from outside the top 5, top 7 guys, there's just too many players that probably have the same grade, and it's kind of your flavor. And I don't know if it's advantageous to trade up, and especially with the Chargers too. You mentioned defensive tackle. How about corner too? Like I really love how Tarheeb Still and Cam Hart played, but at the end of the day, they don't have a lot of time on task. They're 5th round guys who I believe will turn themselves into really good starters in this league. But you have to have a little more depth there, and maybe some other guys that you can depend on. And you bring in Dante Jackson from Pittsburgh, but cornerback is another position, Money, that I don't feel like they are a complete operation yet. And again, I guess Dante Jackson is just another example of, hey, these kind of stopgaps for a year or two while they continue to build through the draft. That's kind of the theme of free agency. And by the way, you have to overpay in free agency. Milton Williams was super overpaid because the Patriots had a ton of money, and they were desperate to actually bring some guys into Mike Vrabel's program. Joe Hortiz has never operated that way. The Ravens don't operate that way. So you weren't going to overpay for Milton Williams. I think that would have gotten people excited, but at the end of the day, he would have made way, way, way too much money when you have other needs you have to fill.
Yeah, I think, and one thing, look, do I know this to be fact? No, I did not get this from a team source, but I heard enough to believe it to be true. They were in on Davante Adams. They were definitely interested in doing that deal, and the Rams got him. They were in on DK Metcalf. Did they want to go to $33 million in their second round pick? That I don't know, but they were in knowing that this guy's going to be a $30 million a year player, and that was going to cost you a day 2 pick. So they were in on that, and they were in on Puna, and they tried to bring Puna back. So, like, I think the thing about what I would be excited if I were a Charger fan about the way that Joe Hortiz and his staff approached the offseason is when they missed out on what they wanted, that they were willing to take a big swing and write a big check for, they didn't overcompensate. They didn't feel the need to overreact and go out and we missed on Davante Adams. Well, you know what? All right, here's our 2, and here's $33 million a year for DK Metcalf. They were like, no, we've got our price. We're comfortable with our price. It's a lot of money, but if that's not right, then good. Aaron Banks, $77 million? No. Dan Moore, $50 million for 2 years? No. Not Will Fries, $18 million a year. Not, coming off a broken leg. No, like that's responsible. That's how teams that believe in their process of drafting and developing and coaching, that's how they operate. They're just not going to get hamstrung. And I think you look at 2 years ago, or was it 3 years? I think it's 3 years. 3 years ago, when the Chargers had all that money to spend, and they had a coach that wanted to go out on a shopping spree because I need this, I need this, I need this in order for it to work. I need J.C. Jackson. I need Sebastian Joseph Day. I need Linval Joseph. I need it. I need it. Go get it. And they spent all this money, and it was a complete and total disaster. And it bit them, and it just doesn't, that approach rarely works. If you're the
It's
Eagles,
a temporary high, money. It's a temporary high. It's it for March and April to get excited about, and you get a little pop in the offseason, but it doesn't necessarily equate to wins. Yeah,
you're exactly right, Chris. And so to kind of just finish that point and let you get back to it, they were always going to, this was the way they were going to operate. We got excited about T. Higgins. We got excited about Trey Smith, but it was like once the numbers beyond those two, once those two guys got franchised and the numbers were what they were in a pretty weak free agent class, you just knew this is the way it was going to end up.
Yeah. And hey, if DK Metcalf was in powder blue, it would have been a lot of fun. T. Higgins, the same thing. But if Matthew Golden is in powder blue and he's making a fraction of the cost and he's giving you a similar production with Ladd McConkey on the other side and Mike Williams healthy and maybe Quentin taking another step in year 3, then we have a whole different operation. And I love the process that Joe has gone through. I'm fascinated with team building and just philosophies. And to come from the school of Ozzie Newsome and the Ravens, and DJ talks about it all the time. I really have a great deal of admiration for how they build their team. And I think sometimes we forget because they won 11 games last year, they were in a really bad way with their cap when they had to make all these decisions with Keenan and Mike and Joey and Khalil. And now the cap is healthy. They are planning for, a Rashawn Slater deal. They're planning for all the big deals that they're going to have to make with some of their current guys down the line. Derwin James may want some money here in a little bit. So I do have a great deal of admiration for how Joe Hortiz is building this thing. And don't let the 11 wins fool you. They still need to get their cap healthy. They still need to draft and develop guys into bona fide starters. And that's why you're seeing some of these really good stopgaps. And we saw a bunch of them last year that, we talked about Puna. Puna got paid because of how he performed with the Chargers.
Yeah.
I thought J.K. was like, we weren't expecting J.K. to do what he did because of his injury history, and he was remarkable. So I can go, 5 or 6 other guys down the line that had really good years on one-year deals. Elijah Molden was rewarded for how well he played. So I like what they did, and I think it just sets them up very nicely for the draft. And, we talk about Tarheeb still helping you win a game in Atlanta last year, and Joe Alt being one of the best rookie right tackles we've seen in quite some time, and Ladd McConkey over 1,000 yards and 100 catches. These are rookies that the Chargers are going to have on their team in a month that will contribute in 2025 in a very similar way.
Yeah, look, they're the best exercise to perform if you're trying to figure out, okay, what are they? How are they? Just go through each position group, better or worse. Better, worse, same. Better, worse, same. What do you have? How do you feel about the running back room? They need to draft somebody. Najee, feel great about the idea of being a physical pounding between the tackles or, gap power scheme. That's going to fit him. Offensive line, better. There's just no question. You bring in Mekhi Becton and you bring in some competition at the center position. Second year from Joe Alt, all pro season for, offensive line, better. Running back room, let's talk about it after the draft. Wide receiver room, better or worse? I think it's better because Mike Williams is healthy today and he's 2 years removed from his ACL.
I think it's like same right now. I almost think it's same.
Yeah, I look at last year and I think about, what it was Quentin, it was Ladd, it was Simi Fehoko, it was, what I mean? Like DJ Chark never really played. So I just feel like putting Mike in there, I'm comfortable saying that it's better right now. It still needs work though, right? Tight end, Tyler Conklin, Will Dissly's back, and Tyler Conklin over Hayden Hurst, who barely played last year, better. Opposite side of the ball, edge, probably not as good. That's why that's the one position that I think people are overlooking. If one of these edge guys starts to slide, and you're thinking about interior D-line or running back or if you get one of these edges to slide, if Mike Green slides, if Jihad Campbell slide, I think that's the sneaky sort of play, because Bud Dupree's in his last year, Khalil's on a 1-year deal, Thule is going to be a full-time starter now with no Joey Bosa. That's a premium position. So that's the one where it's like, okay, edge, not as good this year. Corner, I don't know. I think it's probably not as good. I thought Christian Fulton had a really good year last year. So that's where corner comes into play. If Will Johnson is sliding, if Jahdae Barron is there at 22, okay, now that makes sense to try to make that better. Safety, same, right? And so like there's your exercise of sort of where are they at? And that's where then I circle, okay, edge. And then obviously interior defensive line we already talked about. They're nowhere near as good as they were last year with no Morgan Fox and no Poona Ford. So that's where there's the big sort of like blinking light of this has to be squared away. And what a great draft to be able to square it away in. And that's why, and I'll just finish the point with this, Chris, quickly. That's why I think from here, you're going to be in this wait and see mode with the free agency to see what they get. And then once you get your draft squared away, then you figure out, okay, do we bring Von Miller in on a 1-year deal? Do we bring Matt Judon in on a 1-year deal? Do we like that's sort if you don't get that edge, then that's where you can kind of go and play. Oh, we didn't get the corner. All right, let's go get Rasul Douglas. Let's kind of check the medicals again on Asante and see if we feel good about him coming back on a 1-year. That's kind of how I think this is now laying out. They got their free agency, I feel, is done. Now it's all draft, and then post-draft will be that next wave of free agents like the Elijah Moldens, the Christian Fulton, things like that.
Yeah. Keep in mind, too, Junior Colson didn't play really last year. And that's a guy we were expecting big things out of his rookie year. And luckily, Denzel and Dayon held it down. But that's just another impact player. And, we talk about position specific, but just straight playmakers and guys who can make a difference on defense. I think Junior Colson is going to find his way onto the field in 2025.
Oh, yeah.
And make an impact that maybe we didn't see last year just in Jesse Minter's defense. And again, you said it, there needs to be some improvement across the defensive line. We talked about the depth in the draft. And, edge, Bud Dupree, he came in late last year too. So who's to say, like you said, like a Von Miller or another edge guy who wants to, feels like he's got a year left, can make an impact, can make a difference, can come in later in the year. So it's fun, man. I think that Chargers fans should be excited about the next month and, going through all these exercises. Obviously, it's all this speculation, just it makes for a lot of entertainment. But when it's all said and done, I'm very confident that the Chargers are going to do what they did last year and really build their team out with future starters and guys who can contribute right away in 2025, man.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the linebackers. I forgot that group. So it was very polite of you the way you approached that to acknowledge that it was the one group of players that I didn't mention. It's arguably
not at all.
They're one of their strongest position groups. If Junior is who we think he is, and I'd be very surprised if he wasn't, the fact that he is going to be healthy this year and out there with Dayon, you are talking about incredibly athletic, incredibly physical, smart players at that level of the defense. For the one thing that I'll also point out is just kind of think back 12 months and how you felt about the signings of Teair Tart, Poona Ford, Fulton, trading for Elijah Molden, like Will Dissly, as their number one free agent signing. Like think about all of those moves and J.K. Dobbins, and what they ended up becoming. And that's the one thing that's always that I don't think people put enough stock into is you have a front office that has been here for a year now and has demonstrated based on their first year that they know how to go find players that fit their system and fit their coaches. And they have a coaching staff that can coach guys up. And, it got Chris O'Leary a promotion as safeties coach. That's why he's no longer there, because of what he was able to do with Alohi and Derwin and Elijah Molden and get Elijah that big money extension. And I would suspect that's probably going to be the same this coming year. If Coach Clinkscale does it again with corners, he's going to find himself a DC gig. If Mike Elston does it again with this defensive line, with no Joey Bosa and with a rookie interior defensive lineman to go with Teair Tart and Jones and Han, he's going to get a shot. Like, so that's something to remember is these coaches are really, really good. Sanjay Lal with Ladd and with Q and some of the moments that Q had and taking another step in his career. Like those are all guys that you have to be.
Jesse maybe getting a head coaching job, buddy? Like we thought that
exactly.
could have happened this past year, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the pairing too. It's not just the name on the back of the jersey. It's who that player is coming to. Football is the ultimate circumstance-based sport. There are 11 guys on the side of the field in which you're performing. They all need to perform at a certain level for you to be able to excel. And you need to have the right play call, and you need to have the right technique and coaching throughout the week. And like, that's all a huge part of it. And I think that's one of the reasons why they like their 10 draft picks and they want their comp draft picks. And a lot of these free agent signings play into the comp formula because they just feel better about evaluating guys at that level, dropping them into their system with their coaches and developing them and not having to have them break any habits that they learned elsewhere.
Yep. Amen to that, man. Anything else before we get out of here?
No, I would just say, whoever they sign in the next 5 minutes, I'll be excited to talk about them next week, Chris.
I can't wait. I can't wait. This is going to be a blockbuster trade as soon as we stop.
I'll leave it at that.
I guarantee it. I appreciate you guys listening and watching. My mic I'm in Spokane for the women's NCAA tournament, and the Wi-Fi here at my hotel has been a little spotty. So you guys probably won't see what we have lived the last hour. So
you'll be great. Go downstairs and put a bunch of money on red or black or the 00 and 0, whatever that thing is now.
Yeah. All right. We'll get out of here. For Buddy, I'm Chris. This has been Chargers Weekly. We'll see you next week, guys.